The morning light spilled through the blinds as Rachel opened her eyes, greeted by the same view she had woken up to for the past 8 years. Her small apartment above the bookstore wasn't fancy, but it was hers. The wooden beams that ran across the ceiling had become familiar friends, marking the passing of seasons with their subtle creaks and groans. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and reached for her phone. No messages. It wasn't surprising. Tuesday mornings were always quiet in Bayshore. The small coastal town operated on its own rhythm, one that Rachel had grown accustomed to since moving here after college. Another day, she whispered to herself, a habit formed during years of living alone. Her voice sounded strange in the empty room, like it belonged to someone else. The floorboards felt cool under her bare feet as she padded to the kitchen. The coffee maker, a gift from her brother 3 Christmases ago, gurgled to life with the press of a button. The familiar aroma filled the small space, providing a moment of comfort before the day truly began. From her kitchen window, Rachel could see the ocean in the distance. Gray today, matching the clouds that hung low in the sky, the sight of the waves rolling endlessly toward shore used to fill her with a sense of wonder. Now it was just part of the backdrop of her life, like the sound of seagulls or the smell of salt in the air. As she sipped her coffee, Rachel's eyes drifted to the small wooden cross hanging on the wall. It had been a gift from her grandmother, who had raised Rachel on stories from the Bible and Sunday morning church services. The memory of her grandmother's hands, wrinkled but strong, turning the pages of her well-worn Bible made Rachel's chest tighten with a mixture of love and guilt. When was the last time she had actually prayed? Really prayed? Not just mumbled automatic words before holiday dinners? 2 years ago, 3? The faith that had once been the center of her life had gradually faded into the background, like a radio playing in another room. Rachel showered quickly and dressed in her usual outfit, jeans, a comfortable sweater, and the blue pendant necklace she wore almost every day. Looking in the mirror, she noticed the dark circles under her eyes, testaments to another night of tossing and turning. Sleep had become a luxury lately, her mind too busy with worries to rest properly. The wooden stairs creaked under her weight as she descended to the bookstore. The written page had been a dream come true when Rachel bought it, using every penny of her savings and a loan that had taken 5 years to pay off. The shelves, filled with carefully selected books, still brought her joy even on the hardest days. She flipped the sign on the door to open at exactly 9 a.m., just as she had done 6 days a week for the past 8 years. The routine was comforting in its predictability. The morning passed slowly. An elderly couple browsed the travel section but left without buying anything. A mother with a toddler spent half an hour in the children's corner, eventually purchasing a picture book about dinosaurs. Rachel rang up the sale with a smile, making silly faces at the child who giggled in response. "My daughter can't get enough of books," the young mother said, gathering her purchases. "She's going to be a reader just like her dad." "That's wonderful," Rachel replied, meaning it. "Readers are made, not born. You're doing a great job." After they left, the store fell silent again. Rachel used the quiet time to update her inventory and arrange a small display for local authors near the front window. Her hands moved automatically while her mind wandered elsewhere. The news had been bleak lately. Natural disasters, political tensions, economic struggles. The weight of the world's problems had been sitting heavily on Rachel's shoulders, though she couldn't explain why. It wasn't like she could personally fix any of it. And then there were her own problems. The bookstore was barely breaking even these days, with online shopping taking more of her business each year. Her last relationship had ended almost 2 years ago, and the prospect of meeting someone new in a town this size seemed increasingly unlikely. Her parents were getting older, living 3 states away, and the guilt of not visiting them more often gnawed at her. The bell above the door jingled, pulling Rachel from her thoughts. Tom, the owner of the coffee shop next door, walked in carrying 2 paper cups. "Thought you might need this," he said, placing one of the cups on the counter. "You looked tired when I saw you through the window earlier." "Is that your nice way of saying I look terrible?" Rachel joked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Tom laughed, the corners of his eyes crinkling. In his 60s now, his hair had gone completely gray, but his energy remained youthful. "You could never look terrible, but you do look like you've been carrying the weight of the world lately." Rachel sipped the coffee, perfectly made with just a touch of cinnamon. Exactly how she liked it. "Just not sleeping well." "Too many thoughts. Anything specific?" Tom leaned against the counter, his own coffee cradled in his weathered hands. Rachel hesitated. How could she explain the vague sense of emptiness that had been growing inside her, the feeling that something important was missing from her life, though she couldn't name what it was? Just life stuff, she said finally. The store bills, you know how it is. Tom nodded, though his eyes suggested he knew there was more to it. Well, if you ever want to talk, I'm just next door. Been around long enough to have seen most problems come and go. Thanks, Tom, I appreciate it. After he left, a group of high school students came in, filling the quiet store with their energy. They were working on a project about classic literature, and Rachel spent an hour helping them find resources, explaining the difference between various editions of The Great Gatsby and suggesting supplementary materials. Watching them leave, their backpacks heavy with books, Rachel felt a brief surge of purpose. This was why she had wanted the bookstore, to connect people with stories that might change them, just as books had changed her throughout her life. Lunchtime came and went. Rachel ate a sandwich at the counter while flipping through a new novel that had arrived in yesterday's delivery. The words failed to hold her attention, her mind drifting to questions that had been plaguing her lately. What was she doing with her life? Was running a small bookstore in a coastal town really making any difference in the world? At 35, was it too late to make a change to find something more meaningful? The afternoon brought a steady trickle of customers. A retired teacher buying a mystery novel, a teenager looking for poetry, a tourist couple purchasing a book about local history. Rachel helped each one, making recommendations and engaging in small talk. Between customers, she found herself staring out the window at people passing by. Each person with their own story, their own struggles and dreams. How many of them felt lost sometimes the way she did? How many put on a brave face while questioning everything inside? As closing time approached, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows. The street outside emptied quickly, people hurrying to get indoors. Rachel watched the raindrops race down the glass, remembering how she and her grandmother used to bet on which drop would reach the bottom first. God's tears, her grandmother used to say about the rain. Sometimes happy, sometimes sad, but always a blessing. Rachel wondered what her grandmother would think of her now. Would she be disappointed that Rachel's faith had faded? Or would she understand that sometimes life complicated the simple beliefs of childhood? The last customer of the day was Mrs. Chen, who ran the flower shop across the street. She came in just before closing, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. Just in time, Rachel smiled, glancing at the clock that showed 5:55 p.m. I promised my grandson I'd bring him something new to read tonight, Mrs. Chen explained, heading straight for the children's section. She returned moments later with a book about space exploration. He wants to be an astronaut this week, she said with a fond smile. Last week it was a firefighter. The world is full of possibilities when you're 7, Rachel commented, ringing up the purchase. Mrs. Chen studied Rachel's face for a moment. You look tired, dear. Everyone keeps saying that today, Rachel laughed. I guess I need to invest in some better concealer. Or maybe in a good night's sleep, Mrs. Chen suggested gently. The store will still be here tomorrow, you know. After Mrs. Chen left, Rachel locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising a proper storm. As she went through her closing routine, counting the register, straightening shelves, turning off lights, Rachel's mind returned to the questions that had been circling for months now. What was her purpose? Was there something more she should be doing with her life? Why did she feel so unsettled in a life that, from the outside, looked perfectly fine? Upstairs in her apartment, Rachel made a simple dinner and ate while watching the storm through her window. The wind had picked up, bending the trees along the street. The ocean would be wild tonight, waves crashing against the shore with renewed force. She thought about calling her brother or a friend just to hear another voice, but decided against it. What would she say? Hi, I'm having an existential crisis. How was your day? They would worry, and there was nothing really wrong that she could point to. Instead, she took a hot shower, hoping the water would wash away some of the heaviness she felt. Afterward, she stood before the small wooden cross on her wall. I don't know if you're listening, she whispered, feeling foolish and desperate at the same time. I don't even know what I'm asking for. Direction, maybe? Some sign that I'm not just drifting? The only answer was the sound of rain against the windows and thunder in the distance. Rachel climbed into bed earlier than usual, a book in hand, though she doubted she would focus enough to read. The storm outside matched her internal weather, restless, powerful, uncertain. As she finally drifted toward sleep, one last thought crossed her mind. Something has to change. Little did she know, something would, and sooner than she could possibly imagine. The storm grew wilder as the night deepened. Rain lashed against the windows of Rachel's apartment, and wind howled between the buildings like a living thing. It was past midnight, but Rachel was still awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed surrounded by old photo albums. She couldn't explain what had pulled her to dig these out from the storage closet. Maybe it was the conversation with Mrs. Chen, or the prayer she'd whispered to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore. Whatever the reason, she now flipped through pages of her life, studying photos of herself as a child with bright eyes and an easy smile. When did I lose that? She wondered aloud, touching a picture of herself at 10 years old, standing proudly beside her first bicycle. The joy in that girl's face seemed so distant now, like looking at a stranger. One album held photos from her college graduation. Her parents, beaming with pride. Her grandmother, then still healthy, clasping Rachel's hands and telling her, "God has special plans for you, my sweet girl." "What plans?" Rachel whispered to the empty room. "Where did they go?" Lightning flashed, briefly turning night to day, followed almost immediately by a thunderclap that shook the building. Rachel jumped, then laughed at herself. The storm was directly overhead now. She closed the albums and returned them to the closet. The clock on her nightstand showed 1:17 a.m. She had to be up early to receive a delivery at the bookstore. With a sigh, she turned off the lamp and slid under the covers, listening to the storm's fury. Sleep, when it finally came, dragged her down like an undertow. At first, her dreams were ordinary, fragmented scenes from her day mixed with nonsensical images. She was in her bookstore, but the shelves kept rearranging themselves when she wasn't looking. Then she was a child again, walking with her grandmother along a beach that stretched endlessly. Suddenly, the quality of the dream changed. The scattered images disappeared, replaced by darkness so complete it seemed solid. Rachel became aware that she was dreaming, yet it felt more real than reality itself. The darkness didn't frighten her. Instead, it felt like a warm blanket wrapped around her. "Hello?" she called out, her voice sounding different somehow, fuller, more resonant. The darkness began to change, not brightening exactly, but thinning. Like morning fog dissipating to reveal what had been hidden. Rachel felt herself rising, though she couldn't see her body or any reference point to measure movement against. Then, without warning, she was somewhere else entirely. The walls of her bedroom were gone. The storm, the town, the whole world seemed to have vanished. Around her stretched a vast expanse that she couldn't properly see or define. It wasn't white or black or any color she could name. It simply was. And she wasn't alone. A presence approached. Or perhaps it had been there all along and she was only now able to perceive it. Rachel couldn't see it in any conventional sense. There was no body, no face, no form she could describe later. Yet she was absolutely certain something was there with her, something vast and ancient and aware. Her first reaction wasn't fear, which surprised her. Instead, she felt a profound sense of recognition, as if meeting someone she had known before birth and forgotten until this moment. "Who are you?" The question formed in her mind rather than on her lips, yet somehow she knew it had been heard. The presence didn't answer with words. Instead, Rachel felt a wave of impressions wash over her. Love so intense it would have brought her to her knees if she'd been standing. Wisdom deeper than oceans. Joy as boundless as the sky. With absolute certainty, she understood she was in the presence of something divine. "Why me?" she asked, her spirit trembling with the weight of the moment. Again, no words came, but understanding bloomed within her mind. There was no why she hadn't been chosen above others. The divine presence had always been there for everyone at every moment. It was only that now, in this moment, the veil between worlds had thinned enough for her to perceive what was always present. Then the message began. It didn't come as speech or text, but as direct understanding, appearing fully formed in her consciousness. Each concept unfolded into the next like watching a flower bloom in time-lapse. The message was both simple and impossibly complex. It spoke of connection, how all life was intertwined in ways humans rarely perceived. It revealed patterns that extended from the smallest subatomic particles to the vastest cosmic structures. showing how the same fundamental principles appeared at every level of existence. It showed her glimpses of people around the world, a fisherman in a distant country mending nets, a child drawing with chalk on a sidewalk, an old woman tending a garden, a businessman staring out a high-rise window questioning his choices. Each one connected to all others, each one affecting the whole in ways they couldn't comprehend. The message spoke of compassion, not as a nice ideal, but as a fundamental force, as real and necessary as gravity. It revealed how acts of kindness created ripples that extended far beyond their origin points, while acts of cruelty did the same in the opposite direction. Most importantly, the message conveyed a sense of urgent hope, not blind optimism that ignored problems, but a clear-eyed recognition that healing was possible, necessary, and within reach. The world was at a tipping point, balanced between darkness and light, and each person's choices mattered more than they knew. Throughout it all, Rachel felt neither judged nor praised. There was only a profound acknowledgement of her humanity, with all its flaws and potential. The divine presence didn't demand worship or blind faith. It simply offered perspective, a glimpse through different eyes. As the message concluded, Rachel felt herself filled with a question: what should I do with this? The answer came not as instruction but as invitation. She was being invited to carry this perspective back into her daily life, not to preach or convert but to remember and embody, to see differently, to act from this expanded awareness. A final impression formed in her mind, an image of ripples spreading across water. She understood this message wasn't for her alone. It was meant to move through her to others, not through grand gestures, but through small, authentic moments of connection and truth. Then, with a sensation like being gently exhaled, Rachel felt herself returning, falling softly back into herself. She woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in bed. The room was dark, but the storm had passed. Through her window, stars were visible in patches between clouds. The clock read 3:42 a.m. For several minutes, Rachel sat frozen, afraid that any movement might cause the experience to fade like ordinary dreams. But this wasn't fading. The details remained crystal clear, the understanding still humming through her body like electricity. Her hands trembled as she switched on the lamp. The familiar sight of her bedroom was both comforting and strange, as if she were seeing it through new eyes. Everything looked the same but felt different, more vibrant, more significant. With shaking fingers, Rachel reached for the notebook and pen she kept by her bed for recording book ideas. She began to write frantically, trying to capture the experience before it could slip away. But how could words on paper possibly contain what she had just experienced? It was like trying to capture an ocean in a teacup. Still, she wrote, page after page filled with her handwriting, growing increasingly messy as she raced to document everything she could remember. The message about interconnection, the visions of strangers whose lives somehow mattered to her own, the patterns that linked everything together, the urgent hope that had been entrusted to her. When her hand finally cramped too badly to continue, Rachel set the notebook aside and looked at the clock again. 5:15 a.m. She'd been writing for over an hour, yet it felt like mere minutes. She rose from the bed on unsteady legs and walked to the window. The town was still sleeping, streetlights casting pools of yellow on empty sidewalks. In the distance, the ocean reflected the fading stars. It all looked exactly as it had yesterday, yet everything had changed. Rachel pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it been just a dream? A product of stress and existential questioning? Or had she truly experienced something beyond normal understanding? The skeptical part of her mind, the part that had gradually pulled her away from her childhood faith, suggested it was nothing more than an unusually vivid dream. Perhaps her subconscious, wrestling with her recent questions about purpose and meaning, had conjured this experience as a way of processing those thoughts. But another part of her, a deeper part, recognized a truth that transcended logical explanation. The experience carried a reality that couldn't be dismissed so easily. The message she'd received resonated with something fundamental within her, something that recognized its truth even as her rational mind struggled to categorize the experience. Rachel made herself a cup of tea and sat at her small kitchen table, watching dawn break over Bayshore. The first rays of sunlight transformed the town, turning windows into gold mirrors and casting long shadows across streets that would soon fill with people going about their ordinary lives. "What do I do now?" she whispered to herself. No divine voice answered, but she felt a quiet certainty growing within her. She would start small. She would look at the people she encountered each day with new eyes, recognizing the connection between their lives and hers. She would speak the truths she had been shown, not as doctrine but as invitation, inviting others to see what she had seen, to remember what most had forgotten. She had no idea where this path would lead. She only knew she had to take the first step. As the sun cleared the horizon, Rachel showered and dressed for the day. When she looked in the mirror, she noticed something different in her eyes, a clarity, a purpose that hadn't been there before. The face looking back at her was still her own, with all its familiar features, but it was also somehow new. "Good morning," she said to her reflection, and for the first time in a long while, she meant it. The morning light felt different as Rachel unlocked the bookstore. The familiar routine of turning on lights, checking the register, and preparing for customers now seemed overlaid with a new significance. She moved through these tasks with half her mind still processing the night's experience. The delivery truck arrived promptly at 8:30. Miguel, the driver who had been bringing books to her store for years, greeted her with his usual friendly smile. "Morning, Rachel. Got 5 boxes for you today. Where do you want them?" "Just inside the door is fine," she replied, helping him maneuver the hand truck through the entrance. As Miguel stacked the boxes, Rachel found herself really looking at him, not just seeing the delivery man who came weekly, but truly seeing the person. The lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and worry. The careful way he handled the boxes, despite what must be a physically demanding job. The wedding ring that had worn thin after what she guessed were many years of marriage. "Everything okay?" Miguel asked, catching her staring. Rachel blinked. "Yes, sorry, just didn't sleep well last night. That storm was something else, wasn't it?" "Sure was. Woke up my whole family. The kids ended up in our bed, which means nobody got much rest." He laughed, signing off on the delivery form before handing it to her. "Hope you have a good day. See you next week." As he left, Rachel felt a strange urge to call him back, to ask about his children, to learn more about the life he went home to after delivering her books. The feeling was new and unsettling. Throughout the morning, similar moments kept occurring. Mrs. Peterson, who came in every Tuesday to browse the mystery section, mentioned offhand that her cat was sick. On any other day, Rachel would have offered a perfunctory "I'm sorry to hear that" before moving on. Today she found herself asking genuine questions, learning that the 16-year-old cat was Mrs. Peterson's last connection to her late husband. "He gave mittens to me on our 40th anniversary, the elderly woman explained, her eyes growing misty. "Said I needed someone to keep me company when he was gone. Somehow he knew he wouldn't be around much longer." "Would you like to show me a picture?" Rachel asked, surprising both of them. Mrs. Peterson's face lit up as she pulled out her wallet, revealing a well-worn photo of a gray tabby. "He's the best companion I could ask for. I'm taking him to the vet again tomorrow. I hope he'll be okay. Let me know next time you're in." The genuine concern in Rachel's voice seemed to touch something in Mrs. Peterson, who reached out and briefly squeezed Rachel's hand. "You're a sweet girl. I always have thought so." These interactions left Rachel feeling simultaneously drained and energized. It was as if a filter had been removed from her perception, allowing her to see the complicated humanity in each person who crossed her path. The divine message from her dream kept surfacing in her mind, the interconnectedness of all people, the ripple effects of compassion, the urgency of remembering these truths. During her lunch break, Rachel retreated to the small office at the back of the store. She pulled out the notebook she'd filled in the early morning hours, rereading her frantic attempts to capture the experience. The words seemed pale and inadequate compared to what she had felt, yet they were enough to bring the memories flooding back with startling clarity. Most dreams faded within minutes of waking. Even the most vivid usually dissolved by breakfast, leaving only fragments behind, but this experience remained crystal clear, as if it had been etched directly into her consciousness. "Am I losing my mind?" she whispered, closing the notebook. The question wasn't entirely rhetorical. Rachel had always prided herself on being level-headed and practical. Even in her more religious days, she had approached faith with thoughtful consideration, rather than blind acceptance. Now she found herself grappling with an experience that defied rational explanation, yet it had felt more real than anything she had ever known. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, keeping Rachel too busy for deep contemplation. A group of tourists wandered in, seeking shelter from a sudden rain shower. A teenage boy spent an hour in the fantasy section before purchasing a thick novel. A harried-looking woman rushed in 5 minutes before closing, desperately seeking a specific children's book for her daughter's birthday. "I promised her this exact one," the woman explained, showing Rachel a picture on her phone. "I ordered it online weeks ago, but it never arrived, and her party is tomorrow." Rachel recognized the book immediately, a story about a girl who discovers she can talk to animals. "I think we have one copy left," she said, leading the woman to the children's section. After a brief search, she located the book on a bottom shelf. The woman's relief was palpable. "You have no idea what this means. My daughter's been talking about this book since her friend got it. With everything else going on right now." She stopped herself as if realizing she was oversharing with a stranger. "It's been a tough time?" Rachel asked gently. Something in her tone must have conveyed genuine interest because the woman's carefully maintained composure briefly cracked. "My husband lost his job last month. We've been trying to keep things normal for our daughter, but it's been challenging." In the past, Rachel might have offered sympathetic words before politely ending the conversation. Today she found herself saying, "Would you like a cup of tea? I was just about to make one before closing up." 20 minutes later, Rachel sat across from Lisa, the woman's name she'd learned, at the small table in the store's reading nook. Their conversation had moved from immediate struggles to deeper questions about resilience and hope. "Sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it," Lisa admitted, warming her hands around the mug. "The constant struggle, you know? Then I see my daughter's face when she learns something new or when she laughs, and I remember why we keep going." "Those moments of connection," Rachel said thoughtfully. "They're what make everything else bearable." Lisa looked at her curiously. "That's exactly it. How did you know?" Rachel smiled. "Just something I've been thinking about lately." After Lisa left, clutching both the book and a coupon for 20% off her next purchase, Rachel closed the shop with a mind buzzing with thoughts. The conversation had felt significant somehow, as if it were a direct application of what she had been shown in her dream. That night, Rachel sat cross-legged on her bed, the notebook open before her. She began to write again, not about the dream this time, but about her day. The people she had really seen perhaps for the first time. Miguel and his family, Mrs. Peterson and her beloved cat, Lisa struggling to maintain normalcy for her daughter amid financial hardship, each life intersecting briefly with her own, each connection an opportunity for compassion or indifference. The choice, she was beginning to understand, was always hers to make. A thought occurred to her suddenly. What if the divine message wasn't meant just for her? What if she was meant to share it? The idea both excited and terrified her. Who would believe her? How could she possibly convey something so profound when words failed to capture even a fraction of what she had experienced? Rachel picked up her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found her brother's number. David had always been the more spiritually inclined of the two of them, maintaining the faith they had been raised in while Rachel's had faltered. If anyone would listen without immediate judgment, it would be him. Her finger hovered over the call button, then retreated. Not yet. She needed more time to process this herself before trying to explain it to others. Instead, she called her oldest friend, Nora. They had known each other since college, and while they now lived in different states, they had maintained their connection through monthly calls and occasional visits. "Hey, stranger," Nora answered on the third ring. "I was just thinking about you yesterday. How's life in Sleepy Bayshore?" "It's—" Rachel paused, unsure how to continue. "Actually, something happened. Something I can't really explain." "Are you okay?" Nora's tone shifted immediately to concern. "I'm fine. Better than fine, maybe. It's just—" Rachel took a deep breath. "Do you ever feel like there's more to reality than what we normally perceive? Like we're missing something important?" There was a brief silence on the other end. "This doesn't sound like the practical Rachel I know." "What's going on?" "I had an experience," Rachel said carefully. "A dream, I guess you could call it, but it wasn't like any dream I've ever had. It felt real, Nora. More real than this conversation even." "What kind of dream?" As Rachel tried to describe her experience, she became increasingly aware of how impossible the task was. Each attempt to explain fell short, reducing something transcendent to clumsy human language. "So you think God spoke to you?" Nora asked when Rachel finally fell silent. "I don't know if I'd put it that way exactly. It wasn't like the God I learned about in Sunday school. It was bigger, less defined, but yes, something divine, something beyond normal understanding." Another pause. "Have you been under a lot of stress lately? Or trying any new medications?" The question stung, though Rachel knew they were reasonable. "No, nothing like that. I know how this sounds, believe me. If you were telling me this story, I'd probably be asking the same questions." "I'm not saying I don't believe you," Nora said carefully. "I'm just concerned. This is so unlike you, I know. That's what makes it so significant, don't you think? That it happened to me of all people?" They talked for another hour, circling around the experience without reaching any conclusions. By the time they hung up, Rachel felt both relief at having shared her secret and disappointment at not being fully understood. She went to the window and looked out at the night sky, where stars punctured the darkness with ancient light. The vastness above her echoed the expansiveness she had felt in her dream. "Help me understand what to do with this," she whispered to the stars, to the divine presence she had encountered, to herself. No thunderous voice answered, but as she stood there, a sense of peace gradually settled over her. Perhaps understanding would come with time. Perhaps the way forward would reveal itself one step at a time. For now, it was enough to have been awakened. A week had passed since the dream. Rachel sat in her brother David's living room, watching his expression change as she finished explaining what had happened. She had finally worked up the courage to drive the 3 hours to his home, feeling that something this important needed to be shared in person rather than over the phone. David's face cycled through concern, confusion, and what looked uncomfortably like pity before settling into a carefully neutral expression. "So," he said slowly, setting down his coffee mug, "you had a spiritual experience." Rachel winced at his tone. "I know how it sounds. Do you?" David leaned forward. "Because it sounds like my practical, rational sister, who hasn't been to church in years, is suddenly claiming to have received divine messages." "Not claiming," Rachel corrected. "I did receive something. I can't explain it any better than I already have, but it was real. David, more real than anything I've ever experienced." David sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of their father that Rachel almost smiled despite the tension. "Have you been sleeping okay lately? Or eating properly? Mom mentioned you seemed stressed about the bookstore when she called you last month." "This isn't about stress or lack of sleep," Rachel said, trying to keep frustration from her voice. "I'm not having a breakdown." "I didn't say that," David backpedaled. "But maybe. Have you thought about talking to someone? Professionally, I mean?" The suggestion hung in the air between them. Rachel had expected skepticism, but her brother's immediate leap to questioning her mental health stung more than she'd anticipated. "I'm not crazy," she said quietly. David reached across and squeezed her hand. "Of course you're not. But even mentally healthy people can have unusual experiences during times of stress. Remember when I was in college and convinced myself I had a heart condition? Turned out to be anxiety. This is different." "Maybe," David conceded, though his tone made it clear he didn't believe it. "But would talking to someone be such a bad idea? If nothing else, they might help you make sense of this experience." Rachel nodded, not because she agreed, but because she recognized the conversation wasn't going anywhere. David's mind was made up. She'd had some kind of stress-induced spiritual hallucination, and the best response was therapy. On the drive home, tears blurred her vision several times, forcing her to pull over until she could see clearly again. She'd hoped her brother, with his continued connection to faith, might at least consider the possibility that something genuine had happened to her. Instead, he'd responded with barely disguised concern for her mental stability. Would everyone react this way? The answer, she discovered over the next several days, was yes. Her attempt to explain the experience to her mother ended with a gentle suggestion that perhaps she was working too hard and needed a vacation. Her closest local friend, Taylor, listened politely before changing the subject so abruptly it was almost comical. Even Tom from the coffee shop, who had always struck her as somewhat mystical in his outlook, responded with awkward platitudes about the mystery of dreams. The constant dismissal made Rachel begin to question herself. Had it really been a divine message? Or was everyone right? Was she having some kind of breakdown? The doubt followed her through her days, coloring her interactions and making her second-guess the certainty she'd felt. She stopped mentioning the dream to others, tired of seeing the same concerned expressions, hearing the same gentle suggestions that perhaps she needed help. 2 weeks after the dream, a man Rachel had never seen before entered the bookstore, tall and gray-haired, with wire-rimmed glasses and a tweed jacket that looked like it belonged to another era. He browsed the philosophy section with focused interest. "Can I help you find anything specific?" Rachel offered after he'd been examining the shelves for nearly half an hour. He turned, offering a smile that immediately put her at ease. "I'm looking for different perspectives on mystical experiences across cultures. Do you have anything along those lines?" Rachel blinked, struck by the coincidence. "We have a small section on comparative religion," she said, leading him to a corner of the store. "And some books on philosophy of religion that might touch on mystical experiences." "Perfect," the man said, scanning the titles. "I'm Dr. Howard Chen. I teach philosophy at the community college. We're starting a unit on religious experiences next week, and I like to refresh my personal library before teaching new material." "I'm Rachel," she replied, extending her hand. "I own the store." "A pleasure," Dr. Chen said, shaking her hand warmly. "This is a wonderful bookstore. I'm ashamed it took me this long to discover it, but I only moved to town last semester." As he selected several books, Rachel found herself drawn into conversation with him. There was something in his manner, a genuine openness and curiosity that made her comfortable in a way she hadn't felt since the dream. "Do you believe they're real?" she heard herself asking as she rang up his purchases. "Pardon?" "Mystical experiences," Rachel clarified, immediately regretting the question. "Do you believe people actually have them, or are they just psychological events?" Dr. Chen considered this thoughtfully. "That's the central question, isn't it? Throughout human history, across vastly different cultures, people have reported experiences that transcend ordinary understanding. The consistency of these reports, despite cultural differences, is quite remarkable. But that doesn't answer whether they're real," Rachel pressed. "I suppose that depends on what we mean by real," Dr. Chen replied with a slight smile. "Are they encounters with an objective divine reality, or products of the human mind? Perhaps both simultaneously? These questions have occupied philosophers and theologians for centuries." Rachel nodded, disappointed despite the thoughtful response. She had hoped for something more definitive. As if sensing this, Dr. Chen added, "For what it's worth, I think dismissing these experiences as just psychological is far too simplistic. Even if they occur entirely within the mind, which isn't proven, that doesn't make them less meaningful or transformative." He paused, studying her face. "May I ask why you're interested in this topic?" Rachel hesitated. After so many dismissive responses, she'd grown cautious. But something about Dr. Chen's genuine curiosity made her take the risk. "I had an experience," she said simply. "About 2 weeks ago. I can't explain it, but it was profound, life-changing, and no one believes me." Rather than showing concern or discomfort, Dr. Chen's expression brightened with interest. "Would you be willing to tell me about it? Not as a student to a professor, but as one human being to another. I've spent much of my academic career studying such experiences, and I find them fascinating." And so, for the third time since the dream, Rachel attempted to describe what had happened to her. This time, however, instead of being met with skepticism or worry, her words were received with thoughtful nods and genuine interest. "The ineffability you describe is actually one of the common characteristics of mystical experiences across cultures," Dr. Chen noted when she struggled to explain the communication that wasn't quite language. William James identified it as one of the 4 key markers in his landmark work on religious experiences. For over an hour, they talked. Dr. Chen didn't try to explain away her experience or suggest she seek help. Instead, he contextualized it, showing how her account paralleled those of others throughout history who had reported divine encounters. "Does that mean you believe me?" Rachel asked finally. "It means I take your experience seriously," Dr. Chen replied, "and I see no reason to dismiss it simply because it doesn't fit into conventional understanding." As he gathered his purchases to leave, Dr. Chen handed Rachel a business card. I host a small discussion group at my home every Thursday evening. We talk about philosophy, spirituality, and the big questions of existence. You'd be very welcome if you'd like to join us." After he left, Rachel felt lighter than she had in days. She hadn't been seeking validation exactly, but having someone listen without immediately questioning her sanity made a world of difference. That evening, another strange coincidence occurred. Rachel was helping an elderly man find a book on grief. His wife had died recently, when he suddenly said, "She always told me we're all connected, you know. That what happens to one of us happens to all of us in some way." Rachel froze, the words echoing those from her dream so precisely that goosebumps rose on her arms. "Your wife sounds very wise," she managed to say. "The wisest person I've ever known," he agreed. 52 years together, and she never stopped surprising me. As the week progressed, similar moments kept occurring. A child in the store asked her mother, "If God wanted to talk to us, how would he do it?" A random podcast Rachel played in the background discussed the concept of collective consciousness. A customer returned a book saying, "I couldn't finish it. It felt like the author was trying to say something important, but couldn't find the right words." Each incident alone might have been dismissed as coincidence. Together they felt like confirmation or perhaps reminders of the message she had received. Yet doubts still plagued her. Were these truly signs, or was she simply noticing things that aligned with what was already on her mind? The final blow to her confidence came Sunday, when she decided to attend church for the first time in years. The local pastor, Reverend Wilson, delivered a sermon on false prophets and modern delusions. In these troubled times, he said, his voice ringing through the small church, many claim special revelation. They seek attention or power by declaring divine messages. But the Bible warns us to test every spirit, to distinguish true prophecy from self-delusion. Though he named no one specifically, Rachel felt as if every word was directed at her. Several parishioners glanced her way during the sermon. Had rumors of her experience somehow spread through the small town? After the service, Reverend Wilson approached her in the church lobby. "Rachel, isn't it? I don't believe I've seen you here before. I used to attend with my grandmother years ago," she explained. "I thought I'd reconnect." The Reverend smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "How wonderful. May I ask what prompted this return to faith?" His tone was friendly, but Rachel sensed a challenge beneath the words. Before she could formulate a response, Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman with the sick cat, appeared at her side. "Rachel, I didn't know you came to our church. How lovely to see you here." She turned to the Reverend. "This young woman has been such a blessing. When my mittens was ill, she showed such genuine concern. You know, I've been shopping at her bookstore for years, but lately there's something different about her, a special kindness." Reverend Wilson's expression softened slightly. "Is that so?" The conversation shifted to safer topics, but as Rachel left the church, confusion swirled within her. The Reverend's sermon had shaken her, bringing all her doubts rushing back. Yet Mrs. Peterson's words had touched something deeper. A reminder that whatever was happening to her was bearing fruit in her daily interactions. Truth, Rachel was beginning to understand, was more complicated than she had ever imagined. Thursday evening arrived, and Rachel found herself hesitating in her car outside Dr. Chen's home. The modest house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees, their leaves just beginning to hint at autumn colors. Light glowed warmly from the windows, and she could see figures moving about inside. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself. "It's just a discussion group." But it felt like more than that. It felt like a choice, a step toward either embracing her experience or retreating from it. After the disastrous church service and weeks of doubt, she wasn't sure which path to take. Finally, gathering her courage, Rachel walked to the door and rang the bell. Dr. Chen welcomed her with genuine warmth, leading her into a living room where 6 others sat in a loose circle. They ranged in age from a college student to a white-haired woman who must have been in her 80s. Rachel recognized a few faces from around town, the librarian, a nurse from the local clinic, the owner of the hardware store. "Everyone, this is Rachel," Dr. Chen introduced her. "She owns the Written Page bookstore downtown." Murmurs of greeting rose from the group. A woman about Rachel's age shifted to make room on the sofa beside her. "I love your store," she said. "I'm Lynn." The group's discussion that night centered on the concept of purpose. What gives life meaning? How do we discover our individual purpose? Is purpose something we create or something we uncover? Rachel listened more than she spoke, struck by how the conversation seemed to address the very questions that had been troubling her before the dream. Each person approached the topic differently: the college student with idealistic passion, the elderly woman with hard-won wisdom, Dr. Chen with philosophical depth. "I believe we all have moments of clarity," the elderly woman, whose name was Grace, said at one point. "Windows that open briefly, showing us a bigger picture than we normally see. The trick is remembering what we saw when the window closes again." Rachel's breath caught. The description so perfectly matched her own experience that she nearly spoke up about the dream. But something held her back, not fear of judgment this time, but a growing sense that perhaps her experience wasn't meant to be proclaimed, but lived. After the formal discussion ended, people lingered over tea and cookies. Rachel found herself in conversation with Lynn, who worked as an art therapist at a children's hospital. "The kids teach me more than I could ever teach them," Lynn was saying. "About courage, about living in the moment, about finding joy in small things." "It sounds like meaningful work," Rachel said. "It is, though it can be heartbreaking too." Lynn paused. "Howard mentioned you had a significant spiritual experience recently." Rachel tensed. "He told you about that?" "Just that you'd had an experience you found meaningful." "No details." Lynn smiled reassuringly. "I only mentioned it because I've had one too. Different from yours, I'm sure, but life-changing." "And did people believe you when you told them?" "Some did. Most didn't," Lynn shrugged. "Eventually I realized it didn't matter if others believed me or not. What mattered was what I did with the experience." On the drive home, Lynn's words echoed in Rachel's mind. What mattered was what she did with the experience. Not convincing others, not defending its reality, but living its truth. The next morning, Rachel woke with a clarity she hadn't felt since the night of the dream. She'd been approaching this all wrong, trying to make others understand something that couldn't be fully expressed in words. The message hadn't been given to her so she could convince others it had happened. It had been given so she could embody its truth in her life. Interconnectedness, compassion, hope. These weren't concepts to preach about, but principles to live by. With this new understanding, Rachel began to look for ways to put the message into action. It started small, a community bulletin board in the bookstore where people could post needs or offers of help. A weekly story hour for children that incorporated themes of kindness and connection. A shelf dedicated to books that bridged different perspectives and fostered understanding. She didn't mention her dream again, not even to Dr. Chen or the discussion group, which she continued to attend weekly. Instead, she focused on creating spaces where the truth she had glimpsed could take root naturally. 3 months after the dream, Rachel cleared out a corner of the bookstore that had previously held outdated reference books. In their place, she created what she called simply the gathering place, a comfortable seating area with a small table, a coffee maker, and a sign that read, "Need to talk? Have a seat. Someone will join you soon." The concept was simple. Anyone could sit there, signaling they were open to conversation. Store customers who noticed someone sitting alone could choose to join them, offering a listening ear or simple companionship. At first, the corner sat empty most days, occasionally occupied by teenagers using it as a place to text friends. But gradually word spread. People began to come specifically for the gathering place. The widower who missed conversation, the new mother feeling isolated, the businessman questioning his life choices. Rachel didn't force anything. She simply created the space and trusted that connections would form. And they did, often in surprising ways. The elderly Mrs. Peterson met a young college student who needed a place to stay during breaks, as her family lived overseas. They ended up becoming housemates, the student helping with household tasks while Mrs. Peterson provided a home-cooked meal each evening, and stories of her long life. Tom from the coffee shop connected with a retired carpenter who helped him renovate his cafe, expanding it to include an art gallery featuring local artists. Lisa, the struggling mother who had come for her daughter's book, found both a job through a connection made at the gathering place and friendship with Lynn, who offered art therapy for her daughter. Rachel watched these connections form with a quiet joy, recognizing them as ripples from the message she had received. She no longer needed others to believe in her dream. She could see its truth unfolding before her eyes. 6 months after the dream, Rachel's brother David visited the store. He hadn't mentioned her episode since their uncomfortable conversation, and their relationship had been strained despite attempts at normal interaction during family gatherings. "The place looks different," he commented, looking around at the changes she'd made. "Good different or bad different?" Rachel asked. "Good, it feels, I don't know, warmer, somehow." He wandered around while she helped other customers, eventually finding his way to the gathering place where an older man sat alone. To Rachel's surprise, David took the seat across from him. She watched from a distance as they fell into conversation, the older man gesturing expansively while David listened with genuine interest. When the store quieted, David approached the counter. "Who was that guy?" "Mr. Abernathy. He's a retired physics teacher. Brilliant mind, loves to discuss the nature of reality. He was telling me about quantum entanglement," David said. "How particles that have interacted remain connected regardless of distance. Did you know Einstein called it spooky action at a distance?" "I've heard that, yes," Rachel replied, hiding a smile at the perfect metaphor for the interconnectedness she'd been shown. David hesitated, then said, "I've been thinking about what you told me. Your experience." Rachel tensed, preparing for another suggestion that she seek help. "I still don't know what to make of it," he continued. "But whatever happened, you seem good. Better than good, actually. There's something different about you, about this place. I can feel it." It was as close to validation as she was likely to get from her practical brother, and Rachel found it was enough. "Thanks," she said simply. As closing time approached, Rachel stood at the window watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The town stretched before her, each building containing lives connected to other lives in ways both visible and hidden. She no longer questioned whether her experience had been real or not. The fruits it had borne were real, the community forming around her, the healing connections being made, the small acts of compassion multiplying day by day. The divine message continued to work through her, not in grand proclamations but in simple human moments. A kind word, a listening ear, a space where people could remember their connection to each other. That night, as she had every night since the dream, Rachel stood at her bedroom window before sleep. The stars shone overhead, countless lights in the vast darkness. "Thank you," she whispered. Not to any particular deity or vision, but to the universe itself, to the mystery that had opened briefly to include her, showing her a truth she could spend a lifetime learning to live. As she turned from the window, Rachel felt a deep peace settle within her. The world was still troubled, still filled with pain and struggle. But it was also filled with possibility, with connection, with the capacity for compassion that could transform everything it touched. That was the message she had been given. That was the message she would live. And in living it, she would share it far more effectively than words could ever express.